My name is Ed Piskor.
I'm Jim Rugg.
We're going to be taking a look at the Masters of American Comics book, kind of a companion book to me to that In the Studio book in some ways, but we're going much deeper, going to a far earlier landscape of cartooning than that book ever did. Up front, Jimmy, what do you have, though?
I have Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, available now from Image Comics, full color, homeless ninja girl on a skateboard, and all the action and superheroics that would come with that, fighting monsters, mad scientists, evil street gangs, all that good stuff. And you can see how I make this on patreon.com/JimRugg, where I post scripts, original art, sketches, and basically walk through my process of how I make the comics I make, and specifically Street Angel in general. So Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive, get it right now from wherever you buy comics and books.
Red Room issue 1 on the stands. As of this recording, we just shipped off issue 2 to be printed, and guess what, Jimmy? They ran out of paper at the printer's facility. So got to thank the Kayfabe audience for making this thing a hit. Murder on the Dark Web for fun and profit. Get it at your local comic shop. Get it put on your pull list. It's going to come out every 4 weeks. Well, it's going to come out every month reliably. Barring paper issues and shortages at the printers. You can read the comics ahead of time at patreon.com/edpiskor. $3 get you the archive there. I have 3 complete issues up there, and I put new strips up every Tuesday.
Dude, paper shortages is like Golden Age, World War II Golden Age comic stories.
Buy war bonds. So, dude, let's just pop into this thing. I haven't looked in this book for years and years, but the representation within its pages is some of the best stuff that we have to offer in this country.
I think you're right about the In the Studio comparison. That's the other place where you would see like original art being reproduced in beautiful, high quality reproductions. That was awesome. This is 2005. It's a catalog from an exhibition that toured a little bit, but really it's the art. There's so much great art, and it's so well represented in here. Predating artist editions.
Yes.
I can remember scooping this book up probably in the early days when we first started hanging out, so around when this came out, and it was just so rare that you would get to see artwork produced like this, especially the originals or your blown up panels, which is I think an aesthetic choice that still influences comics to this day. So eye candy is the first thing I see in this book.
And this is a visual medium, this YouTube channel that we are running. So let's delve into some eye candy. You're seeing representations of everybody who's in here already. Caniff, Chester Gold, you saw Charles Schultz. Right here we're looking at a page of Mouse comics. I think this is actually blown up because when you read the information on associated with each image, I think Mouse was drawn on like stationery paper, like printer paper.
Yes. Yeah, and also with very generous margins on that printer paper. So you have 8.5 by 11, but the image itself is probably 5 by 8 or something like that. Maybe 5 by 7. Very small.
Don't be mistaken. I don't think I see Chip Kid's name in this book anywhere. They're just kind of borrowing his flavor.
Yeah, no doubt. But it's a nice way to showcase the stuff, as you said, very graphic. The other thing that this book does, it's like taking, say, an art history approach to comics. So 20th century American comics is really what this covers, and it's neat to see something like Winsor McCay in the same book as, Robert Crumb, and connecting kind of the path between those two artists.
Yeah. Jimmy, when I was at the Kubert School, Joe Kubert owned a bunch of his favorite kind of strips from when he was a kid. He had about 4 or 5 Winsor McCay pieces, and dude, these originals here, gigantic, man.
Yeah, McCay pretty universally regarded as like the first masterpiece, producing the first masterpiece comic book art. Just a super visual artist, known for his animation work as well, but Nemo, it feels like this is the thing that set the table for those broadsheet comics pages and what can be done with them. Paintings essentially for the general population as these things would come out. I mean, stunning, visually just stunning.
As the years go by, the size of the paper gets bigger and bigger on which he works.
This was also, if you're watching this at home, even these feel a little bit small in their reproduction here. And this is an oversized book, this is a 9 by 12 or bigger book. But even like with the great reproduction, these feel a little bit small because of how big this stuff was and how detailed his artwork was.
They really chose good representation of his work. I was showing somebody some Nemo stuff earlier this week and used a big Nemo book and was, running around trying to find basically the strips that were in here. I would have done much better just to pull this out.
Yeah, this stuff is so fun to see, like, what he is doing. He experiments with all this visual stuff, and they did pick the right strips to show that off. But, elongating figures, turning your flat landscapes into these round forms, just mind-bending sort of things. And again, like, when is this? 1913. It's not like this was something you were seeing anywhere else. This is just a very inventive, imaginative artist showing you a weird depiction of what might be out your window. Psychedelic, 60 years before psychedelia was a real thing.
Yeah, right.
Lionel Finnegar is an interesting artist because he has a career far beyond comics, right? Like, he gets into Bauhaus as one of his claims to fame. He was a photographer later, a couple decades after this. Only did comics for a couple of years, but all of this, like, first generation of newspaper cartoonists, at least when I started looking at this stuff, what I took away is, like, they didn't have a template.
Right.
It wasn't like you grew up wanting to draw comics for the newspaper. So, like, they were bringing people in who had fine art backgrounds, who were painters, who were people that had the visual skill, and it was like, here's a giant broadsheet, what can you do with it? And that's how you get these guys that are just doing things, creating rules that future generations might break.
It is sort of fun seeing what they all kind of like consensus agree upon with some of the cartooning stuff. And Herriman is like one of those early pieces, like the Herriman, Bud Fisher kind of look of these characters. A lot of people started to adopt this
Go back one.
imagery.
I wanted to show these two pieces because this is your, like, original art for this strip, and you can see it's kind of repositioned. Yeah, this is right. So you see, like, some of the counterpoints, but some of those panels don't appear here. And some of them are reworked a little bit.
Right, yeah.
It's I don't know. It seems like such a strange way to work that at that time period. Like,
yeah.
Way before, like, we digitally compose stuff. It's totally normal today for people to draw on different pieces of paper and then put it all together somewhere else. Pretty unusual, I think, at this time period.
Yeah, like this stuff is even like it's redrawn for this. Yeah, very confusing.
Right, it is. It's not quite a one-to-one matchup, but I think it speaks again to kind of the way these guys didn't have a template for how to do this.
Yeah. Herriman, we spoke on him in some Warren Bernard work that we did earlier.
Yeah, it's nice to see. I always love reading this kind of stuff because it's beyond my ability to really describe what I'm responding to with something like Crazy Cat. So reading somebody, trying to interpret that always adds to my enjoyment of the strips. And, Herriman, it's just one theme, and it's just every version that you can imagine over decades, but playing with the form in ways that no other cartoonist really has before or since.
These color hold pieces, I wonder if that's done the same way as comic books.
You know what, man? I have no idea. Because when we get into Frank King and you start looking at, like, his color work, I was looking at that stuff and, like, I don't know how this is reproduced or what he's doing.
Even this, you
Same
see,
with this.
it looks like watercolor. You see brush strokes in here.
Yeah, I don't know what the process is for that. I do think it's probably something a little different than most of what we encounter whenever we're looking at blue line processes and stuff. It's some other process, but I can't tell you what that process is.
Yeah. Getting into Segar, man. How thankful were you? It's like this book primes the pump for the future comic strip reprints, like the really, really nice Fantagraphics, Popeye reprints start coming out a little after this, the Peanut stuff. This is the precursor.
Yeah, it also made me, as I was looking through this week, made me think, like, we need to do this story, this Popeye story with the sea hag. Yeah, it's pretty great to see this, and you're right. This was the beginning of whenever the good reprints of everything started coming out, and this kind of is. There's a couple of these books that are like the template for, okay, these strips need to be reprinted in a nice edition. This book set the table.
Pretty baffling to discover that Popeye's a ginger, by the way. And another one of those crazy strips that, like, began as one thing and sort of ended as another. There are very popular manga that sort of work that way, where, it starts off as this one thing, starts to get threatened with cancellation, they pull out all the stops, and then, create a smash hit.
Do you feel like X-Men did that?
Oh, definitely, sure.
It kind of flounders around in that first iteration and goes in a slightly different direction. Yeah, it's real interesting with the Popeye strip especially. It's probably one of the best examples of that. But it's also like wrestling history is full of that,
Sure.
right? Where characters tweak their character a little bit and then take off.
Yeah.
And it's just one little piece or whatever. Sometimes maybe a big piece, but...
Looking at you, Mean Mark.
yeah, for sure.
Look at Frank King flexing with his ink compass, dude.
Dude, this Frank King stuff, it makes me want to read more of all his reprints because it is phenomenal, man. Page after page of just wonder.
To this day, I don't know that there's like the definitive collection of all those Sundays. There are those big,
the
those
Sunday
big
press books.
But Dark Horse bit off more than they can chew, and they were putting together Sunday reprint books chronologically. I think they got 2 books in, man, and it's not near this section yet.
That's the tough part with I think the cartoon strip reprints is that if they run decades, like you might be 10. I mean, when does Popeye show up in Thimble Theater? You know, you
Right.
might be a decade in before you really like the strip becomes what the strip is known for, or the artist hits that mature period of like, this is what we want to celebrate. All these reflections, like the drawings of in the water, I think are incredible. They just feel so advanced. When I think of comic strips, like this stuff's a revelation because there was nothing like this in the newspaper comics I was reading as a kid. It's like we've gone way backwards in that regard.
Talk about backwards, man. Like I heard British people call it a swimming costume, and you could tell looking at this kind of gimmick.
How good that is, like floating in the water and under the water.
So hard.
Beautiful stuff.
Everything's animated, man.
His page layouts are incredible, Frank King's. And we'll see more and more examples of that as we get further into this book. It's interesting, this first part is kind of an overview history of, again, 20th century comics, walking through the artists that are then going to be featured in their own chapters later.
Look at him like messing with like woodcut or something, like using brush as woodcut or linoleum print or something.
Yeah, a lot of these cartoonists too, you'd see them referencing bits of art history, as they're distorting things, and I think that was a fun thing to play with for everyone. But boy, does it speak to the facility that they can draw with.
Now we're getting to the pulp territory, man. Look at Miss Pruneface about to fuck up our boy Dick Tracy, man, for doing what he did to Mr. Pruneface.
The Dick Tracy stuff in this book I really enjoy. They kind of get into his style and, Chester Gold amazing, but they get into that style and how it works on the page and everything, and the black and whites and the noir kind of, what that style brings to it. Just very effective.
Look at what Chester Gold does to his guy, man. He starves him, shoots him in the head, burns him, burns all the hair off his body. Look at that.
That's a great 2-page spread, right? Look at that thing blown up.
Must be just a 22. I had a neighbor get shot in the head with a 22. Didn't enter the skull.
Wow.
Just slid right up the skull piece.
That's what they used to shoot pigs with on my grandparents' farm, 22. But you'd have to shoot them in a specific spot where the skull was barely there.
Right. Just ghastly comics, and the stuff that he does to his villains is it's brutal to think about, and that's coming from the Red Room guy.
I always love this stuff from this book, or from any of these books that would really blow up like an original piece of art. To see the marks that he's making, like little tiny pointillism, giant black silhouettes, and these scratchy pen marks, that is just a ton of shit for, this thing's gonna show up printed at like a tenth of this size or smaller, and yet you get all of that whenever you take a close look like this.
I think about the restraint, though, because the size that he's drawing the stuff at is a little smaller than this, but when he shows off the strips, like the strips are bigger than our field of view.
Neither of your hands in the picture.
yeah, bigger than the field of view of our...
bigger than this book spread.
This stuff right here. It says private collection, but I definitely looked at this from the Billy Ireland, so if that's considered a private collection, cool. But they knew I was a Tracy fan, and I wanted to look, and they had so much Dick Tracy artwork, and I was like, I'd like to see some stuff from, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and I was thinking they would pull out like one strip for me. Dude, they pulled out the box, man.
Right.
Of like, here's 1939, here's 1942, and it would just be, like a government cheese box full of that year's worth of strips.
I love all of these marks too. You know, like your plane being made up of just lines. It's pretty inventive and not what I think of with Chester Gold. And as far as the private collection, I mean, it could have come from Bill Blackbeard.
Yeah.
Because you would have seen it like a decade after this book. So it's possible that's how it got into the Billy Island.
Makes sense, man, because here it is right here, Ohio State University Cartoon Research Library, which is the Billy Ireland. And what a perfect strip to show off for Caniff's work, man. This is what I think of when I think of Milton Caniff.
Yeah, me too. How much does this mark making look like Miller Sin City Book 1?
Yeah, sure.
Which is doesn't make any sense in the context of like looking at mountains and snow and stuff like that, but the line work is very similar. And you know, you get into Caniff and it's one of the easiest dots to connect is Caniff to Kirby.
Yeah.
But it is fun like seeing all these different artists and thinking like how do they coexist?
I love 12-paneled grid, man. I'm a giant fan of that. And to see how, because composing within a square is not as easy as you might think. And look at it right here, man. It's a perfect comic strip.
Yeah, you know what's incredible on these pages? This is your 10-panel Instagram.
Yeah.
You know, that's your Simon Hanselman daily update or whatever. It's like one page and throw the title up there.
Yeah, man. When you see this stuff like Charles Burns comes to mind as well, with these kind of like weird shaped heads and crap.
Yeah, I bet you he's done some drawing studies of these.
When you take a look at his kind of in the studio book, his dad's collection of different viewpoints of figures, there's a lot of Caniff in there.
I wish so badly that he would publish those. I don't know how you could publish them. It's probably trademark would make it impossible, but I'd love to see those things to be able to pour over each one. This is great too because this is, you know, we looked at the strange death of Alex Raymond recently, and Sim talks a lot about Caniff's style and then what happens when Peanuts shows up, and that's a lot of what they talk about. You know, reproduction is getting poorer and poorer as the century moves on, and so this style that Schultz develops with Peanuts, it kind of takes that into account. Like it works really well with the reproduction of the time period. Then of course they talk about the content of Peanuts and, you know, this idea of these kids just abusing each other. kind of feels right. It's the way I remember school.
Right. Jump into your Eisner. The pre-war stuff and the post-war stuff is so distinct.
I was surprised by how simple this looks blown up here. Because, you know, these Eisner title pages are just classic, incredible thing. This piece included, you know, I've seen this piece a lot, but something about seeing it here as like original art, it's just so simple in a lot of ways.
You get that vibe sometimes when you take a look at a piece of original art and you see kind of like the tricks behind what they did to almost create the illusion of complexity or something.
Here's one more to enjoy at home is the end pages from that little tiny panel blown up to this scale, and you really get to see, you know, the tricks and trades, dots on the ground that we read as people, just blobs that read like cars. And then of course, you know, you see it in the context of the page, and it's, you look at the details differently. Yes. You know, when you have that whole page and you have the whole story around it. But that's a pretty simple, you know, title page as well in this, and a pretty simple conclusion page, but very effective. You know, this is one of those stories that, man, you'll see it talked about in a lot of different places.
Saw these originals at Angoulême the year that I went out there, man, and thought it was really cool seeing all the paste ups and stuff with the lettering, using a photograph, using some white media to create the teeming hordes of humanity on the ground floor.
They do a nice kind of segue from the comic strips to the comic books in the context of when these are, although the Kirby stuff is a little bit out of order here, showing the 60s Kirby work.
Right.
Not that I mind. Man, that Silver Surfer giant face. Just classic. Classic stuff. That Watcher's funny.
Kurtzman.
Yeah, that's the part that feels out of sequence.
Right.
You know, like, I don't know why that wouldn't come before Kirby and after Eisner, but the flip side is this is great reproductions of Kurtzman original art, which is awesome. You know, so often he's collaborating with other artists. To see like that, yeah, exactly, it's unbelievable. Great
rubber figures. He gives you everything you need, man. Just slap on the black right there.
Yeah, it surprises me that there is not a vein of artists that have really imitated him in terms of his mark making.
You got to be courageous, man. Like I always think of that that word in relation to Kurtzman's cartooning, because it's like it's the thickest black lines you've ever seen, rubber fingers. You
I
gotta
wonder
have
if
balls.
he was self-conscious about it too. You know, like he seemed eager to work with these. I mean, he worked with amazing illustrator collaborators throughout his career. But I wonder if he was self-conscious about what he did compared to, you know, Wally Wood
Right.
or Will Elder or any of these guys that are just, you know, immensely talented as sort of classic illustrator types.
Check this out, man. Coming from the collection of Glenn Bray, this 3D piece. This is sick, man. We have the color roughs and the initial roughs for a little Annie Fanny piece, and you get to see like all the work. The way it was described to me by Phil Felix, the sort of late period letterer and assistant of these strips, was that Kurtzman, Elder, like they got paid extremely
Right.
well for these little Annie Fanny pieces, and they just sort of put in that extra time, you know, to just, I almost felt bad, like, holy fuck, we're getting paid so well, we better put so much effort into these strips.
I think Hugh had some influence on that effort too. Like I've always heard that he was kind of a taskmaster, you know, in terms of being hands-on, let's say.
You know, I've done work for some rich cats, we'll say, man. Like I've done work with, you know, wineries and stuff, and I remember quoting a price, them doubling it, and me just going, I can't say no, and I just know they're going to freaking ride me hard, man. I just know they're going to ride me so hard, and they did, and the end product was what they wanted, but a lot of conversation from saying yes to the final printed image. Makes perfect sense to go from Kurtzman's humor to Robert Crumb.
It's a great spread. Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing. It even design-wise, it even feels a little bit similar with your 3-letter titles and stuff, and that big title block at the top. Yeah, this one makes perfect sense. But it's another testament to this book, the idea of like Crumb and Kirby, you know, connect those dots. You know, right? So I like that part a lot.
Always loved this cover for the 3-color aspect, and Crumb not using Zipatone for color seps, but using hatching to try to milk the plates.
Man, when I first saw Crumb, and I think they talk about it, Francois Millet writes about Crumb in here, and how like every artist at some point sort of copies Crumb. And I can remember when I first encountered Crumb and doing all of this kind of like the hatching that he would do in the back of panels and stuff. Also, whenever you see just like how every alternative newspaper of that time period would have a Crumb cover at some point.
Yeah.
It just felt, I don't know, man, incredibly of that time period. I like their mix between printed comics and original art.
Mm-hmm. Spiegelman on the scene. Two-Fisted Painters from Raw Magazine, issue 1. Such a good comic. And here we have the mouse stuff.
Yeah, this is where you can see it's original is 11 by 8.5, so printer paper, like you said, and you can see that big ass margin around these things. Like,
so it's basically, it looks drawn to the size that it's printed at, with very little reduction probably.
yeah, it's wild stuff. There's gonna be later on we'll see kind of roughs and then the finished drawings. So you know he was certainly working it all out. But like this might be actual size. That might be 8.5 by 11.
Yeah,
Pretty
yeah,
close.
he's got a bleed going. You can see where the margins would be for the typical page. You know, he comes from the Kurtzman school of roughs and preparation, so makes sense that.
Oh
there'd be
yeah,
a
you
lot
know
of
what? Go
prep.
back one. This is that what I was talking about, like rough and then finished piece.
Yeah,
So you can get an
right,
idea
right.
of, you know, like you say, that Kurtzman version of just draft, tighten it up, and Mouse is so tight in that regard. Like you'd almost have to do it this way for both the density of the language, but also the artwork. Like there's no extra whenever you're drawing at print reproduction size or even maybe enlarging it slightly. Like there's just no room for mistakes in that. Cool to see like the pasted up letters. You know,
Right.
some of it's the real lettering, and then some of it's probably just revising little bits and pieces here and there.
And just looking like he's using like the felt tip, basic like supplies you could just get at Shop and Save or something.
How about that for a segue? Because I think you see similar marks. They're different on Gary Panter's stuff, but it really feels like the same ingredients to go from that mouse page to this page, but just completely applied differently.
Right.
This is a wild page, too, with Nancy and Sluggo showing up in Jimbo's world.
Yeah, this is that OG/magazine stuff. Like,
this is mind-bending comics. This is another one. You picked this up in 1979. You don't have Raw Magazine to give you some context. You just have this. This is rewire your brain. You see this in 1979.
It's unbelievable. Like, the energy in Los Angeles at the time, like, with this kind of stuff, Pettibone is out there. Graining is going to be coming to town pretty soon. Like, it's a whole aesthetic unto itself. And it's grimy. And it's grimy in Glitter Town.
It is. It's post-apocalyptic. It's all of these things that it feels like became the normal pop culture language, but just early and in comics, and hard to contextualize this stuff in the 70s.
Just fun thinking about, Panter had to like create his own lane. There was no place to publish that kind of stuff. Spiegelman had to invent a place in comics for it.
We've seen like Dan Clowes talk about coming to appreciate Gary Panter's work and first encounters with it not landing the way it would over time. I feel the same way. Like, this is another one of those examples of I had to read about Panter, I had to see as much of his work as I could, and then it clicks at some point. Yeah. And it just becomes like virtuoso drawer, big ideas, 1,000 ideas on a page. Wild stuff, man. And drawing-wise, like, people still don't draw like this in comics. It's funny, too, because some of these are drawn very small, and some of them are massive. Like, you read... I love that they have, like, all the sizes listed everywhere for this original art, because this is a dude that's drawing every way you can conceive of.
It's like, cover of 8-Ball 23, 12 by 9, private collection. Yeah, I didn't know I had. I know. I didn't know I had a private collection. I guess I do.
Chris Ware was such a superstar of this time period. I mean, obviously, still very much celebrated, but whenever people started writing about comics, and especially like comics as art, it felt like Chris Ware was just born to be the subject.
Yeah, man. Like, I remember before the first Acme novelty was even published, the journal would be talking about this kid in Texas and showing off Quimby strips. Like, he cuts his own color separations.
And rightfully so. Like, I look at these pieces and just marvel. These feel like I could produce possibly one of these as like a lifetime achievement.
Yeah.
The idea that this is his pages,
right.
Or covers or whatever, but I mean, he's made hundreds, thousands maybe at this point. Those books are like 1.5 inches thick, the collection. It's like unbelievable. I was enjoying this on the reread, like the world's longest shot. Just completely alone on Earth, Jimmy Corrigan. Loneliest boy on Earth.
Little bits from the sketchbook. These would be reprinted in the Acme novelty, what are they called? Date books?
Date books, yep. Yeah, they were a revelation. And they, whoever writes about him, Dave Eggers, I think, talks about that. Because you see these, and it's almost like, is he drawing these on a computer? They're so perfect lines and everything. And then you see his sketchbooks, and it's like, wow, this guy's just a drawing machine. Which is funny, considering how obsessed he is with making comics. But, I mean, he's put in that time at the drawing part.
Spiegelman's in the shadow of no towers when he discovers Photoshop.
I can remember being at an SPX dinner with a bunch of cartoonists, and I can't even remember who all it was, but dudes getting into shouting matches over this book, like across the table at dinner.
A lot of spirited conversation when you put a couple of nerds in a room who haven't seen each other for a year.
Yes. I love it, though. Like, anything that incites that kind of reaction, I'm on board. Especially for an Art Spiegelman book.
Same thing happened with the sculptor, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard a lot of back and forth on that one. So this is fun. This gets into each of the featured artists get kind of an essay. This one is Tom DeHaven. Some of the essayists are really strong. You mentioned Matt Groening a minute ago heading to L.A. He does the Gary Panter essay.
I saw Pettibone's really name for Eisner.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. It's such a unusual pairing, but they do a good job with that. And I think it's really good for promo for this show and for this catalog, you know, like get some of these big names in there, make this as accessible and inviting to as wide an audience as possible, which is exactly what you want and not all publishers do.
Right.
But, you know, you want to bring these comics to the masses. It's like, yeah, pull every trick that you can.
And this book would be, a coffee table book for some bourgeois fucks.
Yeah, I was going to say library bait.
That's for sure.
Every library probably ordered a healthy dose of these.
Herriman creates the X logo.
That's where that came from.
There was a more prominent one on a previous strip that we were looking at.
Jules Pfeiffer doing Popeye.
Makes sense. And just look at these, like, pasted up, like, just tack on another panel there.
They did a good job. I was also thinking about putting this show together and how expensive it must be to gather this artwork. Because they do a good job running down all these originals. You know, some of these originals are 100 years old.
You know something crazy? Like I just submitted some stuff for this art show in Chicago, and a giant Mack truck came to, like, pick up the art. Two big burly tattooed up dudes came, and they were putting on the little foam corners on my illustration board, and I just walked out with them, and was like, okay, so you're gonna go, like, up and down the eastern seaboard picking up pages for this show, and they were like, nah, dude, you get the Mack truck. The whole Mack truck is yours, man. We're heading to Chi-Town.
Oh man, not the most ecologically friendly practice.
No.
Yeah, there's some really great Frank King pages throughout his chapter.
Let's get there. Look at young Skizix as he grows. Those proportions, like. They're so weird here, but I absolutely know and have seen guys built like this.
Yeah, it feels like the cultural norms. You know, you can see snapshots of this from these different decades.
Right.
Look how beautiful his colors are. When I first started seeing these Gasoline Alleys, it felt like, oh yeah, this makes sense with Chris Ware.
Yeah.
You know, knowing he's a fan and everything, you could really see some of these color palettes coming in. Like this kind of stuff, I just love that. Anytime King does water, it feels like it's magnificent. This is one of those, he does this several times too, and I forget what this technique is called, but it's where your background is one giant image, and then your characters are moving throughout the panels, interacting with that background. It's another one of those things that's just such a cool comic trick. And I don't know if he invented it or not, but I've seen lots of examples of his Sundays that do it. Yeah, this is what you love in a book like this.
Using that razor piece, man. Like, conceptually, you read about that and how to draw comics the Marvel way, and it just sounds the antithesis of what you should be doing with your artwork. You know, like dragging razors across your precious drawing that took you a million years.
Man, that's a relatively common technique, you know, from Herriman to, what's this? Brescia, you know, drew that Eternaut 1969 with the razor blade, like drew it ink dipping into a razor blade and stuff. So it can be done. Did you ever hear Frank Miller talk about Chester Gould and Dick Tracy?
You know, I haven't.
It feels like this has to have had an impact on it. Like he must love this strip, right? It's it's some of the best crime comics ever.
You know, when you say it, it makes perfect sense to me. Now we got to ask him.
Great black and whites. You know, it feels like the ingredients are there, but I don't remember reading interviews with him about it either.
The later it gets, the more I like it too, man. Like, just like that brush gets so thick, and look, he's keeping up with technology, dude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I always like that he pulls those elements in, like the punch cards and titles and fingerprints. All of those details, I think, make for a nice visual.
No wonder Milton Caniff gave his artwork to the Billy Ireland, because this piece comes from the Library of Congress, and look at how yellow and gross it is. Look at this, man. Barnes and Noble trying to gank me.
Ooh. I don't know how you got this one home.
Yeah.
I like seeing the originals with the blue.
Yes.
Engraver information, I guess, for the engravers, the printers.
Yep. They know to slap some zips on there.
That's some beautiful color. Pretty bold, too. Like some of those pinks and yellows. Really pops against the navy. This is always the weirdest for me. Like, to me, this character's just so strange looking.
It is, man. It's like you know, a Frank Miller mutant thrust into a World War II.
One of the more odd juxtapositions.
Patrick McDonnell writing about Schultz. That makes perfect sense.
Yes.
He would be pretty much the only, like, post Far Side, post Calvin and Hobbes. He's like the strip that matters.
Yeah, and a similar approach, I think, stylistically. Not the finish per se, but the simplified characters, the use of space. It feels like there's a lot he's taken from Schultz. He also wrote a book on Herriman and Crazy Cat. One of the first Herriman books I ever saw. I like cartoonists writing about comics and other cartoonists.
How does he find the time?
That part's true. There's a thing in here, Art Spiegelman talks about that first generation of cartoonists that were doing like 7 dailies, you know, Sunday oversize, like, and then leading active personal lives, well chronicled, you know, personal lives outside of it, and just the time management being beyond anything we seem capable of.
This piece was hanging at Mocha when we went there that one year, man, and I remember marveling at like that stuff, that bracelet is crazy, and just look at how weird this is. It's like her dress turns into a mattress.
Yeah, that part's bizarre. All the whiteout on this is really weird to me because, like, what kind of lines were you putting in here?
Yeah.
You know, were we seeing, like, bicep definition on her and then Eisner decided not to?
Yeah.
That's some great inks. I would always marvel at the fine feathering that he would get because it looks drawn quickly, but yet it's beautiful. Like, I labor over trying to do that kind of feathering, and it looks like these are just dashed out as, like, not a thing.
The art is so big too, man. So like it gets tightened up significantly when it gets reduced in size. And to this day, I still do what they colloquially call train track crosshatch for drapery. I picked that up from Eisner, man, and continue to use that to this day.
Yeah, I think that looks good. What a page this is.
One of the great ones, man. Like, people would recognize this one as being in issue 1 of the Warren magazine. So, like, this is a very popularly reprinted strip and very, very cool.
Comics and comics. That's a subgenre I dig.
Yeah, man, there's a little Orphan Annie on a page. Some of the classics, man.
Great Rain.
Rain Master. Chunky, thick, porridge coming out of the sky.
I ate porridge this week for the first time in my life.
Is porridge not oatmeal?
Well, not what I ate. It was like eggs and butter and chia seeds and some stuff. Maybe what I ate wasn't exactly classic porridge, but it was named porridge in the recipe.
I see.
These were some of the first like Kirby originals that I would see. You know, outside of like the Kirby Collector, which was one color, so these gave a real warmth to it. And that looks like Vince Colletta there on Thor, I think.
Yeah.
That first Captain America, though, Sid Shores, that was one that I found really, you know, I mean, it was, I studied these so closely when I got this book because you just didn't see this kind of stuff much.
Right.
And they're so powerful. And I mean, speaking of power, like, what a splash page. You know, one of his, maybe his most iconic splash page.
Sure.
It's funny because it's not at all that complex of a drawing, but just as power for like how everybody remembers this story, that image just stands out. That's classic. Herb Trimpe inks on these.
Is that true?
Yeah, this is the last. I think this is the last issue of Silver Surfer.
Oh, right.
And,
Yeah.
he came in. That's like my favorite Kirby piece, and I swear the first time I went to San Diego, I saw the original for that. I can't remember what it was, but it was very cheap compared to what I'm sure it is now, like $3,000, maybe $5,000, something in that vicinity. But it's a 2-page spread from Devil Dinosaur, and it's just one of my favorite images of anything I've ever seen by anyone.
Yeah, man. I think Glenn David Gold was at that San Diego with you, behind you in line, and was like, yeah, I'll take that.
Yeah, that was way out of my price range then, but what a spectacular piece.
Another Glenn Bray piece, man, from his collection. Love those color holds.
Yeah, you talk about a choice piece.
Little pasted up freaking dudes on top of the title and shit.
Dude, those previous, this is Glenn Bray as well. That to me is just phenomenal. I don't know if you could do better than that.
I always wonder what the white media is that they use. You know, it looks like a paint probably.
It does, yeah. That would make sense, I think.
Sure.
I use acrylic paint for most of my white because I just never found a white that I really liked. And who knows what was available back then.
Right. Though you say that, at first probably so much more because there's so much more drawing being done.
You could buy ink at like the drugstore and stuff. So yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
Man, this is all coming from Glenn's collection. Glenn, let's do lunch, man.
At your house.
Yes.
We'll order in.
There's that Bringing Up Father piece. We'll have to go through the artist edition and show off these originals, at scale, in proper pagination and stuff. Because the following page to this, something you got to see when Kriegstein gets on the gimmick.
Yeah, talk about a 3-man tag team.
Freebird rules.
This is a fun essay on Crumb by Francois Mollet. Pretty interesting to hear her reflections on his work and how she kind of encountered his work and then him.
And then she becomes his art director at the New Yorker, and it becomes dicey. Sometimes one will squeak through, oftentimes none. And like when you think about those counterculture 60s cartoonists, and it's like, it seems sort of like slapdash or whatever. You see the wobbly lines. It's the first time you probably like see wobbly lines as panel borders. But when you take a look at the originals, I mean, this is like very like properly prepared and constructed for print and stuff. Like, he knew all the tricks. He was using all the stuff. He just had that organic quality, crop marks and stuff. Like, you just imagine these are maniacs making these comics, but he fully understands print media.
Yeah, and the grasp of the cartoon language, absolutely phenomenal. She talks about him appropriating cultures and history, and I can't imagine comics without that kind of self-awareness and referencing the past.
Right.
It feels like we've totally moved into that, and maybe he's one of the early practitioners of it. He's another guy I marvel at the volume.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely lived on the page for many, many years.
Every element feels considered too. Like, you look at his lettering and stuff, you could really phone it in on lettering if you're drawing like this, but he doesn't. I always wanted, he did an Angoulême poster one year, and I always wanted to try to get hold of it. I never was able to track down one, but it's all these different comics kind of ripped up and put together to create the poster. And you see it in the sample of his work. Another guy who's very much referencing comics history and visual art history.
Roughs and finish piece for In the Shadow of the Towers page. When you start getting into this stuff on that Spiegelman, it looks like Peter Cooper, Neo Photoshop kind of. You learn some filters or something.
Yeah, he's jamming so much stuff together in there. This is a team up of Crumb and him. So some of that drawing is Robert Crumb.
Yeah, I think it's just this, though. Well, yeah, there's a couple. Groening is the perfect guy to be writing about Panter.
100%.
Dude, and this is before the Del Tokyo collection that Fantagraphics put out. Like, this book really does sort of become the prelude to a lot of comics publication after this for about a decade. I guess I never thought about that.
Right. We need to look at that Del Tokyo collection, and because it's so wide, like everybody at home, this is the proportions of it would be like this, just this top tier spread, but very large. We would almost have to do like both our copies, one above, one below, to try to maximize what you could see on screen.
Right.
But that's a great, that was one that I would hear about forever before that collection came out and was impossible to find. You just see it in interviews, a panel, a couple strips here and there. That's a phenomenal book.
These Jimbo and Purgatory books are amazing too, man. He described that he could do like, a couple of inches per page, like a day or a week or something like that.
Yeah, those were a big deal whenever they came out for me. Because also these artists, they don't publish that much.
Right.
Like when a book comes out, it's a real event when a Gary Panter book comes out.
Absolutely. That is the right word for it too.
It's nice to see Chris Ware pages like this as opposed to 600-page collection, because it forces you to appreciate like what he's doing on each page.
Right. And there are subtle things too, like just continuing to connect this line from this panel to these ones, maintaining that parallel.
I remember seeing that at the Carnegie Mellon show. They had a couple of his pages, and they would be like white out to to stop that continuous line.
Yeah.
So it was like he would have drawn those panel borders all in one big line, and then gone in and just a tiny little bit to break them up for each panel. But it keeps that straight line perfect.
Yeah, and it would be on the corner of every single panel, just sharpening them all up.
Yeah, there aren't any shortcuts that I've ever found in his work. And I would like to find some.
I know.
Show me that you're human, Chris. Like, look at that for a page. The lettering is phenomenal. These are great, too, because you get to see a little bit of the blue line underdrawing in them.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's what the one of the things the text talks about. Like when you see the originals and realize that this really is a person drawing these things.
He's another guy that just draws huge,
Mm-hmm.
man. So that helps tighten this stuff up. But when you look at it like this, it's like pretty freaking tight already.
Yeah, this is 23 3/4 by 15. So it is essentially it's two of our 11 by 17s connected is roughly what you're looking at there. So twice the size of a normal comic book page. But then printed, I mean, the reduction is so much greater, especially for, say, Rusty Brown and Jimmy Corrigan, than your typical comic book original art reduction.
Real interesting that it's not hinged anywhere. It's one giant piece of illustration board, so it's like he must be drawing straight up and down on the drafting table or something.
I don't know if I've ever seen a picture of his drawing table.
I have, and it's not
flat?
straight up. It's pretty flat. So I mean,
I guess I have seen it.
is he reaching?
To be like in Monograph or something, there's probably some of those pictures. Yeah, you're right about that.
Because it's stiff board, like
2 feet is a long way to cover.
Tall guy, but still you're reaching.
Yeah.
And we have our bibliographies in the end here.
Couple of drawings here in the back. Well, one I guess. I was thinking there were a couple, but I guess not.
That Gary Panter is a good way to leave things, though.
Really shows you what he's doing. Talk about a maniac. Look at all those figures. You know how you'll see crowd scenes and they'll just be like circles and maybe a couple dots here and there? Like, these are real little figures.
Yeah. I imagine no penciling.
Yeah, I bet not. Which is its own skill set.
Maybe for almost anything here, actually.
Yeah, I bet you. I bet that's part of how this stuff is created.
Nice little cross-section of American comic history, Jimmy.
It really is. And an exciting event at the time. This was like the early days of starting to show art, photograph the original art, show it in these really nice reproductions. It was something that wasn't done very much. And it feels like now this isn't even that much of an event. But at the time, it was such a big deal to have comics presented this way by a big institution in a beautiful, beautiful catalog.
So this is where the show would be...
The Hammer Museum, and then I think there were 2 or 3 other stops. I think there was... I forget what the other places
LA
were, but
and London.
Yeah, a couple of spots that I think it toured to, but the LA spot was like the big opening main show.
Yeah, beautiful stuff, man. Really nice to just... It's a rare bird where you're going to be able to talk about a little bit of Herriman, Kirby, and Gary Panter in the same breath, man. So we had to put this book under the microscope.
It's a fun one, and if you're watching it at home and don't know this book, check your local library. You can probably find this in most decent libraries.
Yeah, library bait is a great way to describe it, Jimmy. Kayfabers, like, follow, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hit the bell. We'll notify you when new vids are available. Jimmy, what's out there, man?
Join me on patreon.com/JimRugg, where you can see my original art. You can download my hard-to-find out-of-print zines and mini-comics. You can see how I make the comics I make. My version of Masters of American Comics, of Jim Rugg of American Comics art at patreon.com/JimRugg.
Red Room issue 1 is out in the wild. We are publishing and printing issue 2 as we speak. It's going to be coming out on a monthly basis. Murder on the Dark Web for fun and profit. Issue 1s are going fast. Get them while they're hot, man, because we're going to have to reprint those things pretty soon. You can read the comics ahead of time on my Patreon, patreon.com/edpiscor. $3 get you the archive there. I have well over 100 pages up right now and put up 2 new strips every Tuesday.
Subscribe to the Cartoonist Kayfabe e-newsletter at the links below this video. You can also find Cartoonist Kayfabe t-shirts and merchandise at the links below this video.
Jimmy, give these guys one less set of marching orders, man. We're going to be on our way.
Read more comics.